Tonight, a stamp of approval, tax cuts for off-the-plan apartments, units and townhouses. Good evening and welcome to ABC News Victoria. I'm Tamara, Oudyn. Also tonight, a royal reception in Canberra marked by a senator's outburst. There's something in the water, new draft limits on safe levels of PFAS in our drinking water, and feeling the squeeze, AFLW players call for a review of the league's condensed fixture. Victorians looking to buy apartments or townhouses off the plan will from today pay less stamp duty under a new plan from the government to turbocharge the state's housing sector. It's hoped the new tax reduction will encourage more people to buy and developers to build, but not everyone's convinced it'll work. Here's state political reporter Elias Kluwer.
One of Melbourne's newest high-rises gets the tick of approval from the Premier.
So can we have a little look?
This build-to-rent apartment complex in Fitzroy North is ready for new tenants, but it's prospective apartment buyers that Jacinta Allen has in her sights.
This initiative is designed to do three things: build more homes, and build more homes.
The new initiative announced today is a stamp duty concession for all buyers of apartments and townhouses purchased off the plan.
The off-the-plan stamp duty concession that cuts upfront costs for buyers will now be extended to everyone: first home, occupier and investor. And secondly, limits will be removed, so the concessions will apply to apartments, units and townhouses of any value.
Under the tax break, buyers of a $620,000 apartment will pay just $4,000 in stamp duty, a $28,000 reduction on what they would usually pay.
Essentially, this is about providing more housing stock, more homes for Victorians. For developers to be able to get away projects of this nature, that is apartment blocks, then effectively they need a level of pre-purchase.
The success of the government's policy will depend on prospective buyers like Eliza Portelli and whether they opt to buy off the plan.
I've been saving my whole life. I'm a really good saver, and always with the thought of buying a property at some stage. No, I wouldn't consider buying something off the plan for sure.
And she says even a stamp duty break won't change her mind.
I don't feel confident that these types of homes are always built with quality materials.
And then there's the other issue, cost.
These super high-rises will be so expensive they're out of reach for young Victorians.
It follows hot on the heels of the government's plan for new high-density zones in inner-city Melbourne.
Yesterday we announced the next tranche of activity centres where we're going to focus on building more homes close to public transport, and in coming days we'll have even more to say about further reforms.
Before Jacinta Allen took the top job, Labor had already promised to deliver 800,000 homes in a decade. It's currently well behind on that target, but 1 year into her tenure and 2 years on from the state election, these policies are shaping up to be a cornerstone of the government's plan to address the housing crisis. The Premier now just needs them to work. Elias Kluwer, ABC News, Melbourne.
A parliamentary reception for King Charles and Queen Camilla in Canberra was shaken by protests today, with Victorian Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe hurling insults and accusations at the monarch before being escorted out. It disrupted an otherwise carefully coordinated day in the nation's capital, where thousands of well-wishers gathered for a chance to meet the royal couple. Stephanie Dalzell reports.
They died for king and country. And now the king honouring them. King Charles and Queen Camilla at the War Memorial in Canberra, starting a day of royal engagements in the capital. Outside, more than 4,000 people waited hours for a glimpse of the pair. Many enamoured.
God save the king.
Some, like 9-year-old alpaca Hefner, less so.
He's met a few famous people over his times.
On the forecourt of Parliament House, a more enthusiastic greeting. 21 shots, salutes and handshakes, with crowds camping out to be part of history. Prime Ministers past and present were inside the People's House for a parliamentary reception. As tributes were paid,
you have stood with us proudly in good times.
And gratefully received.
In my many visits to Australia, I have witnessed the courage and hope that have guided the nation's long and sometimes difficult journey towards reconciliation.
The extent of that highlighted just moments later. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe escorted out of the Great Hall. MPs later condemned the interruption, which didn't mar the sense of occasion for those who'd gathered.
Is a head of state, no matter what people say.
I thanked her for coming all this way. I gave her a tea towel.
King Charles is only the second reigning monarch and the first ever king to visit Parliament House, following in the footsteps of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, who opened this very building in 1988. King Charles then held private one-on-one sessions with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and opposition leader Peter Dutton, before heading to the CSIRO and observing a simulated bushfire, the real version of which have dominated Australian summers. The climate-conscious king seeking to advance the environmental cause across his 16 visits to Australia.
There we go. Little pat gun.
Laying down more roots for future generations.
If the summer doesn't get too hot.
Stephanie Dalzell, ABC News, Canberra.
Australia is planning to dramatically lower what's considered safe levels of PFAS in drinking water. The so-called forever chemicals have been linked to cancer and take thousands of years to break down.
They're in our clothes, cooking products and makeup. PFAS chemicals have even made it into drinking water. Now health authorities are trying to limit that.
Our goal is to produce the highest quality evidence-based guidelines that will enable the states and the water suppliers to supply safe, clean water.
A growing body of research is linking long-term PFAS exposure to cancer and thyroid issues.
Every day of your life, 2 litres of water per day.
The proposed limits follow a crackdown in the US. Under the guidelines, the safe levels of 4 PFAS chemicals would be slashed, but PFOA, recently declared carcinogenic by the World Health Organization, would still be 50 times higher than America's limit. The forever chemicals have been used across the country, including in firefighting foam. But most drinking water has never been tested for PFAS, so the true extent of the problem remains unknown. However, recent samples taken in Sydney detected some of the chemicals at several water filtration plants.
Drinking water remains safe if it complies with the current guideline.
Authorities say the draft guidelines could mean one supply in the Blue Mountains would not be compliant, and there would likely be more.
I think there will be lots of communities that are out of compliance with that, and we will need to put in solutions.
Technology to remove the chemicals is costly.
The customer bills would increase to reflect the additional costs.
There are legal options available to us. We do want to make sure that the cost to the community of pollution is borne by the polluter.
The proposal's open for feedback and will be finalised by April next year. The onus then falls on state and territory governments to enforce any new standards. Xanthi Gregory, ABC News, Sydney.
Drivers in Australia's 3 biggest cities are painfully aware of the cost of using toll roads. Now, a leading industry figure is calling for a shake-up of how those charges are set. Former Transurban Director Tony Shepherd has told Four Corners toll companies should not get automatic price increases above inflation on new roads.
Edwina Hyler used to travel to work on Sydney's toll roads, but when the amount she was paying each week hit $150 in December last year, she quit her job and found a new one closer to home and away from the tolls.
It just wasn't, feasible anymore to pay that kind of money in tolls just to get to work. Like, I'd have to work a day just to pay tolls.
It's a feeling familiar to drivers in Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne, where toll prices have surged during the cost of living crisis. That's because they're pegged to inflation, and so Transurban earned a record $3.5 billion in revenue last financial year, operating 18 of Australia's 22 toll roads.
Their business is not there for the public good, it's there to make money.
Even in times of low inflation, most of its tolls are guaranteed to rise by 4% a year. A giant of the industry and former Transurban director Tony Shepherd says that deal should be off the table for future toll roads.
Well, I think in new projects, I think we can eliminate it. Now, we put it in originally because the risks were just so enormous, and that was what we needed to get people to be prepared to invest.
Transurban declined an interview and did not respond to questions, but in a statement said,
"Toll prices in Australia and how much they rise have always been determined by state or local governments, as have the charges associated with toll notices and late payments."
The New South Wales government has promised to slash toll prices in Sydney and is now negotiating a new tolling model with Transurban.
If we don't reform tolls, Sydney will become a more congested place to live. It'll be less productive than it should be. It'll have a real impact on people's lives, particularly in Sydney's outer suburbs.
Since Edwina Hyland changed jobs, the state government's introduced a 2-year $60 per week cap on tolls. But when it ends, drivers like her may be back to paying full price. Pat McGrath, ABC News.
With the US presidential election now just 2 weeks away, both candidates have been out campaigning for votes in key battleground states.
Happy birthday to you.
Kamala Harris was serenaded by Stevie Wonder as she marked her 60th birthday at 2 church services outside of Atlanta. The Democratic nominee will need strong results in the majority black cities of Detroit and Atlanta to repeat President Biden's 2020 wins in Michigan and Georgia. In suburban Philadelphia, Donald Trump swapped his suit for an apron and learned how to cook fries at McDonald's. Thousands of people gathered outside to watch the Republican nominee serve drive-through customers.
This is fun. I could do this all day. I wouldn't mind this job. I like this job. I think I might come back and do it again. Thank you.
Israel has carried out multiple strikes on Lebanon's capital after announcing it would target Hezbollah's financial operations. Shortly after the warning, explosions rocked Beirut. The Israeli Air Force hit at least 10 sites across the city, as well as targets in the Bekaa Valley in the east and near the border in the south. Meanwhile, in Gaza, hopes of a ceasefire are dwindling after an Israeli strike left 87 people dead or missing. Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran begins tonight's reports with the events in Lebanon.
Explosions at the edge of Beirut's international airport, lighting a night sky blanketed in smoke.
We will be attacking a large number of targets in the next few hours and more targets later tonight.
The target, Al-Qad al-Hassan, a sanctioned non-profit the US says the Hezbollah militant group uses to manage its money. Also used by civilians, it has more than a dozen branches in the densely populated capital. It's a second straight day of strikes inside Beirut. Here, the IDF hitting what it says was a Hezbollah intelligence centre and weapons facility, killing 3 of the group's commanders.
The US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin says Washington wants Israel to scale back its strikes on its northern neighbour, particularly in and around Beirut, adding that the number of civilian casualties is simply far too high. These latest strikes suggest that plea from Israel's strongest ally have gone unheard.
All the while in Gaza, Israel's offensive in the north continues. The streets of Beit Lahia coated in ghostly grey. The dust of buildings once homes, now piles of rubble.
We were asleep around midnight when it suddenly felt like an earthquake hit the area.
Dozens killed by an Israeli strike in the northern Gaza city.
All those who were martyred here are children, women and displaced people who fled from other areas due to heavy strikes, seeking shelter in what they believed to be a safer place.
Children cowering in hospitals after what they've endured. The Israeli military accused Hamas of exaggerating the death toll and insisted the strike used precise munitions against a Hamas target. The killing of the group's leader, Yahya Sinwar, doing little to slow the relentless barrage in Gaza. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Jerusalem.
A referendum on whether Moldova should join the European Union is now too close to call. The referendum results, which hang in the balance, are a shock for pro-EU President Maia Sandu, who topped the first round of presidential elections held at the same time. The two polls have been overshadowed by fears of Russian meddling amid the war in neighbouring Ukraine. Moldova has alternated between pro-Western and pro-Russian governments since the 1991 breakup of the Soviet Union. Ties with Moscow have deteriorated under Ms Sandu, who condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Coming up on 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson tonight, the looming gas supply shortfall threatening how we do business.
Neither New South Wales or Victoria has in place a plan that will adequately address the shortfall of gas.
For every working day, it's about $1,600.
Companies will either have to decide whether to stay in Australia or how they are going to change their manufacturing.
Also, I'll speak to Riley Keough, granddaughter of one of the most famous men who ever lived, Elvis Presley.
The family of a Victorian man who's been missing for almost 5 months has made an appeal for public help. 55-year-old Ronan was last seen near Frankston Oval in Melbourne's southeast on the 28th of May. Police say they hold grave concerns for his welfare as he has epilepsy and an acquired brain injury, which both require medication. Today, SES crews began a 5-day search in Frankston, focusing on residential areas and local businesses. People living in Frankston South, particularly around High Street and Warringah Road, have been urged to check their properties and CCTV.
He didn't have a lot of friends. His best friend was his carer, which is my eldest son, and he's lost at the moment. He's just not coping well. None of us are.
There's a big piece of our family that's missing at the moment, and we just want him home.
Emergency services are at the scene of a serious incident involving a large tip truck in Melbourne's outer southeast tonight. An air ambulance has been sent to a private property at Cranbourne South. It's understood a person was trapped under the truck. At this stage, their condition is unknown. Before it hit Victoria, last week's wild weather had already passed through Broken Hill and parts of the far west of New South Wales. Since then, remote communities there have been affected by mass power outages, leading the state's government to declare it a natural disaster.
The race is on to construct temporary replacements for these transmission towers knocked over during last week's huge storm. Until then, Broken Hill and much of the far west is relying on a single diesel-powered generator, forcing local businesses to manage their power consumption.
We had to cancel the Sunday evening shows and then now we're closed until the pylons are replaced and the normal electricity generation is back online.
The mines have ceased production since the storm hit and workers won't return until power from the grid is restored. Miners have the option of using their annual leave or taking leave without pay.
It's a crazy situation to think that people are going to be impacted, you know, with not having any money coming in each fortnight. It's going to hurt a lot of people, yeah.
The New South Wales government has now declared the incident a natural disaster, following pressure from Broken Hill's mayor and the Nationals.
What it will allow is government to compensate and give money back to the people. Also, increase the amount of services.
The Perillia mine is closed. There's 500 workers there being impacted. It's costing the mine $250,000 each and every day, and people are not quite sure what's happening.
The situation has been made worse by the lack of a second functioning generator, with Transgrid confirming that generator number 2 has been out of service since September, with it needing more work to get it back up and running again.
When you've got one connector in and one connector out in one of the most isolated cities, not just in Australia but in the entire world, you need to make sure that you've got backup generation.
The temporary towers aren't expected to be in place for at least another 2 weeks, leaving many here in the dark. Kokahala Connor, ABC News.
Lawyers say Qantas is facing a compensation bill of hundreds of millions of dollars for illegally sacking workers in the middle of pay negotiations. 1,700 ground crew, including baggage handlers and cleaners, will receive various payouts after being let go during the pandemic.
It was a day that these Qantas workers had been fighting for 4 years.
compensation for being illegally sacked when the airline outsourced their roles as they were preparing to strike.
I can put it behind me now, and it can pay bills that I didn't anticipate.
I expected to be there till I retired, and when this happened, it was an absolute shock.
1,700 SAC ground crew will now receive payouts for what they went through, ranging from $30,000 to $100,000 each.
Marriages have broken down as a result of this. People have lost houses. People have had distress, have had mental illnesses.
Workers will also be compensated for 1 year of lost work after the court found the airline would have legally outsourced their roles in 2021.
This is the spirit of Australia. You dig in when it gets tough and you don't give up. And here we are today having a massive victory.
Altogether, the airline is facing a big bill.
It'll probably end up somewhere between, say, $300 and $350 million in compensation.
While this might sound like a lot, this lawyer says that the company still saved cash by outsourcing the roles.
Well, I think what they've done was the right decision financially because it will have saved them money.
The airline had set aside $70 million for this legal battle, but now it has to go away and figure out the final bill. It says it'll be working with the union through a mediation process, and once again, it's apologised to its sacked workers. The airline is also facing a fine, which will be decided at a later date. Amelia Terzon, ABC News.
To finance now, and soaring gold and silver prices have helped push the local share market and the Aussie dollar higher today. Here's Alan Kohler.
Global uncertainty, both in the Middle East and the US election, has sent investors rushing into precious metals, the traditional safe havens. And that's sent gold up 37% in 12 months to a record high, and silver up 45% to a 12-year high. And analysts are predicting that this run for both gold and silver has further to go. Silver jumped a huge 6.3% over the weekend, and palladium 3.7%, while oil fell 2.5%. Now, part of the reason for the run is anticipation that China will eventually announce some decent stimulus for its ailing economy any day now, which is pushing all commodities up and leading to gains by mining stocks on the market, and they underpinned a solid gain on the ASX today. But two stocks were dumped for similar reasons. WiseTech Global and Mineral Resources are both dealing with messy scandals involving their founders and CEOs, Richard White and Chris Ellison, respectively. Ellison is accused of tax evasion, and the WiseTech board has been in crisis meetings all weekend dealing with allegations about Richard White's sex life. Investors looked at their watches, made excuses and left both companies today, although WiseTech is still well up for the year, as the chart shows. The US market is in suspended animation, awaiting November the 5th, and the stakes are high. American share prices have outperformed all others for 15 years for the simple reason that American companies have captured all of the earnings per share growth in the world since the GFC. It's quite staggering. And the Australian dollar stayed above 67 US cents, 100 yen and $1.10 Kiwi. And that's finance.
To sport now, and it feels like the season's only just begun, but with AFLW finals around the corner, there's been mixed reactions to the league's trial of condensed fixturing. After squeezing 11 games into a 10-week home and away season, the players say something needs to change.
After a whirlwind 8 weeks, the AFLW finals picture is becoming clearer.
Not wanting to look too far ahead, but also knowing, we do need to keep winning.
Having won 4 in a row, Melbourne is one of the teams on the cusp of the top 8. The Demons will need to overcome an equally strong Hawthorn, which remains in contention for the minor premiership.
We've had a lot of success and a lot of change this year as well, and I think that it's about maintaining our form, not looking too far ahead, just taking it week by week.
Thursday's battle between the two sides will be the opening game of the competition's Indigenous round, capping off a controversial condensed home and away season with the 18 teams, each playing 11 games across 10 weeks.
I think that there's general consensus that the condensed fixture is probably not something that we'd like to continue with. It just puts a lot of strain on the players and on the clubs themselves.
The league has a guaranteed minimum of 12 matches per team next season and is looking at bringing the season forward to an earlier start to alleviate the fixture crunch.
And hopefully we've learned from this year from a time slot point of view, from broadcast, and we can take those learnings forward, but supportive of playing as much football as possible.
It's obviously been a bit of a tough period, the condensed fixture with concussion and injury. We've obviously seen key players go out and find it hard to get up. But I think the overarching philosophy is we want to be playing more footy.
There'll be more footy in more places this weekend, with Darwin and Cairns hosting matches on the first week of the Indigenous round. Fraser Fife, ABC News, Melbourne.
New Zealand is celebrating its first Women's T20 World Cup triumph after defeating South Africa by 32 runs in the final in Dubai. Player of the tournament, Amelia Kerr, top scored with 43 as the White Ferns made 5 for 158. Kerr also took 3 wickets as South Africa was restricted to 9 for 126. It was a remarkable turnaround for New Zealand. It had come into the tournament on a 10-game losing streak.
I'm really hopeful that tonight's victory can inspire that next generation of not just young girls but young boys as well to pick up a cricket bat, a cricket ball, and the impact of hopefully what tonight we've been able to achieve is going to be long-standing and long-reaching, I think.
Charles Leclerc has won the US Formula One Grand Prix ahead of his Ferrari teammate Carlos Sainz. It was the 3rd victory of the year for the 27-year-old from Monaco. Lando Norris had finished 3rd but received a 5-second penalty for passing Max Verstappen off the track. Verstappen was elevated to 3rd position ahead of Norris and extended his championship lead over the Englishman to 57 points. Australian Oscar Piastri finished 5th.
It's just how it is. It's quite clear in the ruling you can't overtake outside the white line. Yeah, there's not more to say. I mean, it's painful, but up until then, of course, we had a really good battle.
In rugby league, the Kangaroos say they won't be haunted by the past as they prepare to face the Kiwis for the first time since their 30-0 drubbing in New Zealand last year. Australia will take some momentum into the rematch after their 18-0 win against Tonga in Friday's opening round of the Pacific Championships. But Mal Meninga's side knows they'll need to improve against the Kiwis, who'll be keen to reopen old wounds when the sides meet in Christchurch on Sunday.
We are moving forward and, can't probably dwell on the past too much, as cliche as it is. So we've got a new team here and, it wasn't nice to be a part of. Every time you put on those colours, you want to do that jersey proud.
To the weather now, and cloud cleared in Victoria's south overnight. Minimum temperatures mostly ranged between 7 and 10 degrees. It was coldest at Mount Hotham once again, where it got down to -1. This morning, the cloud and fog cleared across the south, leaving sunny and dry conditions. It was warm too, with temperatures around 4 to 8 degrees above the October average. It got to 27 in Bendigo, 30 in Horsham, but the state's top of 31 was recorded at Oudyn. Here in Melbourne, the temperature peaked at 27 degrees at around 4 o'clock this afternoon, and it's still sitting on 27 outside now. Interstate today, it was partly cloudy in Sydney, mostly sunny in Brisbane, Hobart and Perth. A top of 24 in Canberra today, mostly cloudy in Adelaide, and Darwin had showers with a top of 36. The satellite images showing low to mid-level cloud over much of the eastern seaboard and high cloud over parts of WA and South Australia. A low-pressure trough will enter Western Victoria tomorrow. Then on Wednesday morning, another ridge is expected to extend over the north of the state. There'll be showers tomorrow over eastern Queensland, southern WA, Western South Australia and Tassie, and an unstable air mass stretching over the tropics and into inland WA will trigger showers and storms. For the capital cities, partly cloudy in Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth. A shower or two is on the way for Hobart and Darwin. It'll be mostly sunny in Sydney and 31 in Townsville. Back home, it'll be dry and partly cloudy across most of the state tomorrow, with a few light showers developing in the far west later in the day. The Mallee and Wimmera are the subject of a high fire danger rating. It'll be warm to hot at first, with light to moderate northeast to northwesterly winds, but cooler light to moderate southerly winds from mid-morning will cross the state from the west. On the bay, 15 to 20 knot northerly winds will turn south to southwesterly and increase to 25 knots by the late afternoon, but waves will only reach about 1 metre. Tuesday in Melbourne will be mostly sunny, with just the slight chance of a shower at night. The temperature is expected to hit 30 tomorrow and it'll get down to 15 tonight. And looking ahead, Wednesday and Thursday, a shower or two, 22 and 16. Friday, partly cloudy, 17. Saturday, a sunny 23. And that's it for this evening's bulletin. Stay with us now for 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson.